It doesn't get talked about a lot these days, but in 2010, Sega would release the bizarrely titled Sonic the Portable. The game served as a means of experiencing classic arcade-style Sonic action on mobile phones, but with a devoted title designed with touch controls in mind. Before there were the Christian Whitehead remakes of Sonic 1, 2, and CD on mobile, all we really had to work with was this little oddball cover album of a classic Sonic game, which served a similar purpose to games like Sonic Pocket Adventure or Sonic Advance 1, in bringing the arcade side-scrolling Sonic experience to a new market with a dedicated new release. But is it any good? Does it hold up today? Well, the phrase, "for what it is," will be doing a lot of heavy lifting today. Sonic the Portable is as casual and safe as it gets, which is exactly what I think they were aiming for. It's probably fairest to compare Sonic the Portable to other handheld Sonic titles rather than major console releases, but even then, Sonic the Portable doesn't really stack up all that well. What really jumped out at me at first is that stylistically, Sonic the Portable is odd. It seems to seek to replicate the feeling of a Mega Drive Sonic game, while also using elements of Sonic Rush, such as Sonic's character model. With the gritty, more urban vibe of Sonic Rush, it's just bizarre seeing that Sonic in what are slightly higher fidelity versions of classic Sonic stages that use kind of 3D shading while being themselves 2D assets. Compared to the pixel art and low poly aesthetics of other handheld Sonic titles, Sonic the Portable looks incredibly cheap, without an aesthetic to really call its own. Whatever art style the level artwork is going for, Sonic is not interested in sharing that, clearly. A slightly amped up version was released for NVIDIA Tegra devices, which features a different character model for Sonic, much more resembling the current design. Not gonna lie, I actually like the Rush version, but I will say the Tegra version does have some really nice shading. It really doesn't help the game's lack of any visual identity that the level themes do very little to distinguish themselves from the levels they're clearly drawing inspiration from. Meaning that while these levels have names of their own, mostly, they don't really feel new, which begs the question, why did they not go down the mobile port route first rather than making a dedicated Sonic game for mobile phones that's trying this hard to replicate the classics? Even the music is clearly an approximation of the Genesis synthesizer, but it doesn't sound anywhere near as good or as varied as what you'd actually hear on the Genesis. The melodies are fine, but the instruments sound like they're trying very hard to sound retro, when that was really never the point of those old Sega Genesis synths. The charm came from these limited little sound chips trying their absolute hardest to replicate real instruments. But when it's just trying to sound like retro synth, it has a completely different effect, and one that is, in my opinion, nowhere near as strong. So as far as being a tribute to the classics goes, Sonic the Portable is incredibly slapdash. It feels pretty out of touch with the vibes that it is clearly trying to channel. But how's the gameplay? Well, it needs to be taken into account that typically the way you'd play Sonic the Portable today, you'd play it via PC emulation with a controller. And there you will notice that Sonic feels pretty strange when compared to other Sonic games. It's not as accurate to the classics it's clearly trying to pay tribute to as, say, Sonic Advance or Sonic Pocket Adventure. Again, this is much more of an approximation of the classic Mega Drive Sonic games than it is a successor to them. It never quite reaches the high-speed thrill of the classics, where you're rolling downhill at top speed, but you can also effectively stop Sonic on a dime just by letting go of the analog stick. His in-air control is less influenced by his speed as well, allowing for more in-air control. And it feels like the speed requirements for inclines and loops have been drastically cut, meaning you won't find yourself sliding back down a hill just because you didn't push the little analog stick far enough. Unless you decide to roll. Yeah, no idea what actually happened here or what the justification for nerfing rolling this badly would be. But this was definitely a mistake. It cuts the thrills in half. Yeah, it's really easy to make fun of this game's very loose approximation of the classic physics, but it's important not to forget that the game was developed with touch controls in mind. With touch controls, it helps that it's much easier to stop Sonic, and that you don't have to be overly precise with jumps. Hell, they added the homing attack from the 3D Sonic games to help with that as well. It really doesn't hold up when played on a controller. It's a lot less stimulating, the skill floor is significantly lower, but at the same time, Sonic the Portable is clearly going for a very casual, beginner-friendly approach, and with a less tactile control method, maybe dumbing the physics down might have been the right overall call for what they were going for. It just, to me, feels contradictory to what made Sonic special in the first place, that being that very signature blend of high-speed platforming. Again, this feels more like a tribute album by a less skilled cover band. The mobile versions of Sonic 1, 2, and CD also would go on to prove that classic Sonic gameplay could translate to touch controls just fine. My guess is that those ports were intended for Sonic fans who are a bit more skilled and familiar with these controls, and won't have a mega hard time adapting to touch controls. While Sonic the Portable was just, again, meant to be a much more casual experience. For what it is, I can see the logic. The overall structure of Sonic the Portable is, again, as casual as it gets. The stages of Sonic the Portable are accessed by a pretty charming map screen, and there are only 4 of them. Okay, I get that this was a mobile game, but just 4? Sonic the Portable's level selection is like if you took Sonic 1 and 2 and just crunched them down to the absolute bare essentials, the most famous and most infamous stages. But you've generally got the overall staples of a Sonic game here anyway within these 4. Your free, relaxed, grassy cliffsides just begging to be explored, your upbeat, flashy casino stage, your more platforming-heavy, maze-like stage, and your Eggman factory. These appear in the form of Green Hill, Casino Night, Labyrinth, and Metropolis, albeit with new names, but really the theming is identical. What's weird is what they chose to adapt here, though. Green Hill and Casino Night are beloved stages, but who the fuck was asking for Labyrinth and Metropolis back? I will say, Mad Gear is a much better stage than Metropolis, helped by the homing attack rendering the enemy placement trivial, and Lost Labyrinth certainly tried some interesting ideas to separate itself from the original Labyrinth zone. As few acts as Sonic the Portable has, there are at least 4 acts per zone. 3 main acts and a separate boss act, which works okay for pacing here. There's not really a story to Sonic the Portable, so it's not like the bosses and acts needed to flow seamlessly this time. But I will say, 3 acts per zone? Shish, I thought we were over this. 2 acts per zone is much better and helps the game feel fresher and more well-paced. And yeah, there are times when these zones do drag. Casino Street's second act is a pinball score attack. With these physics? And in Lost Labyrinth's second act is a minecart challenge controlled by tilting the phone and tapping the screen whenever you need to jump. Yeah, okay, I'll take that over darkness gimmicks like fucking Sonic Superstars attempted. But it really does feel like a waste of an act. We could cut this. We could easily have sliced some of these acts out here and maybe use that new free real estate to add an extra zone. That said, once you beat Splash Hill, you can play the game in almost any order you want, as long as you finish off with a boss. Meaning that if you are getting tired of one particular zone, you can always come back to it later and try another zone. The boss fights are, you guessed it, reprisals of previous boss fights in Sonic 1 and 2, except now, they each have a pinch mode a la Sonic Advance. Even before the pinch mode though, they do ultimately play differently throughout due to the different controls and the use of the homing attack. But, again, the game is sorely lacking an identity to call its own, and the bosses certainly aren't helping with that. The pinch modes are neat, but they don't exactly add much meaningful to the fight, with the exception of the Labyrinth boss, which uses crushing pillars in the pinch mode, effectively serving as this game's one original boss fight. I know, they did it! Once all 4 zones are cleared, the egg station opens up leading to the final boss act, which also seems to outstay its welcome as it begins with a boss rush before moving on to the main event. Really stalling here. You can also see that the overall aesthetic of this stage is evoking Death Egg vibes, and lo and behold, the final boss is the one from Sonic 2. But admittedly, he has been amped up this time with a grueling pinch mode. You have rings this time, but he has a ground pound move where if you're not positioned correctly, regardless of how well you just did or how many rings you kept, you are not making it off the egg station alive. And there's really no suggestion of where to stand beforehand. Until this point, the game was hell-bent on dumbing everything down and being the most casual Sonic game that even a little baby could play. Yet they decided to make the final boss as bloodthirsty as this. Absolute maniacs. Special stages also make a return, and while they may resemble the Sonic 1 special stages, functionally they are different. This time you rotate the maze around Sonic to help him reach the emerald. You can also shake the stages as well, like a pinball table. There'll be areas where you need to collect a set number of rings to enter, and you can also grab extra time, etc, etc. These, honestly, aren't bad. It's rare that you see the Sonic 1 special stage concept revisited, because everybody has a boner over that fucking half-pipe, but it's a neat concept. I have to admit though, I do prefer the Sonic 1 version of these stages. The bumpers feel just a bit less aggressive, and I like that you can still change the direction of the stage using Sonic in that original Sonic 1 version, while still being in control of Sonic, whereas here you are in control of the stage. And one area where this game has the Sonic Advance series beat is that accessing the special stages is straightforward and not completely fucking ridiculous. It's just like Sonic 1, where you're treated to a giant ring portal at the end of a stage if you kept 50 rings by the end. And that's a fine way to do it. But also, that once you've collected all of those emeralds, you do indeed unlock Super Sonic, and he feels very powerful. The same general physics quirks that plagued Sonic the Portable up until this point do persist with Super Sonic, but I guess it makes a tad more sense with him since he can fly and defy gravity and all that. And he does at least move fast, jump high, and he's got the whole invincibility thing, so it's a good Super Sonic. This actually marked the first time Super Sonic would be playable outside of a final boss act since the 90s. So that's quite a win for Sonic the Portable. Overall, Sonic the Portable tends to get lost in the sauce of handheld Sonic titles, and for a good reason. Its only real purpose was to be a classic-styled Sonic game you could play on mobile phone. And as soon as the mobile port of Sonic CD rolled out, that was effectively a death sentence for this dumbed-down, overly curated version. For what it is, just a cheap, casual mobile title made to introduce newcomers to the franchise, it's perfectly serviceable. But for longtime Sonic fans who have experienced the classics, everything Sonic the Portable tries to do has been done before and better. Unlike Sonic Advance, it's no successor to the classic series, nor does it claim to be. But I do think Sega kinda underestimated what Sonic could offer the world of mobile gaming with this one. And I think that ultimately is why it didn't really stand the test of time. Thoughtless, slapdash presentation, no original ideas to call its own, and questionable controls that do not hold up the second you've got a controller in your hand. Sonic the Portable is just a perfectly whatever, middle-of-the-road 2D platformer. But it could have been a lot more than that. And that's why this one faded into obscurity. It never saw any release on later consoles. It served as an alternative to the classic Sonic games at a time when the classic Sonic games were not officially available on mobile phones. So, it did the job, and that's the best I can say about it. But now, in a world where Sonic Origins exists, Sonic Mania exists, why would you ever play this? The video's over. Get out. Now, where would I be without the generosity of my trusty patrons? We're going to start with a shout out for the patrons in the $10 and above tiers. We have Just Another Evil Robot Clone Seeking Revenge, Xander Wolf, Ghostly Phantom, Twilord, KB, Sad Goku, Dare Denny, Kale Bennett. If I had more space, I'd explain that. It's taken me way too long to update this. And Mr. SP, Sirius the Skeptic, and Biotin. And now, on to the patrons in the $5 and above tier. We've got Joseph Tribble, Press Play to Jason, Gideon Wells, Basic Content, Ben Raven, Reese Burns, Manalza, Goat Cannon, Silver, Josh Strider, Grant Allen, Marv Animation, Cho Henshin, RT0, Carl X, SSS06, and Vera Wild. Thank you, good folks, so much for your generosity. The video's now over. Get out.